Well, it's a tough pill to swallow for Canada, but the reality is that Canada is now prioritizing the Asian markets over the American markets. It's super bizarre, but it is what it is. So we're going to take a look at it. We're going to add some commentary. We're going to criticize what's going on. And more importantly, above and beyond just my opinion, I want to know from you guys as we watch these videos together what you guys think about this. And before we get into it, all I ask, it's free to do, is for you guys to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and without further ado, let's get right into this.
Yeah, I'll just make a few comments. Look, as I emphasized the other day, the government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations, our discussions with our American counterparts, and we have a consistent focus in those discussions on doing the best deal for Canadian workers and their families. It is the sole responsibility of the Government of Canada to have those discussions with the United States, and it's the best way forward. And as I say, we stand ready. Now, we are capable of doing more than one thing at one time. You'll be seeing within the course of the next 2 weeks an ambitious budget which makes generational investments in Canada, and we are in the process of diversifying our trade relationships, the focus of our meetings here in Asia. And those are tangible. We have an intention to more than double our exports away from the United States over the course of the next decade. That's more than $300 billion. We agreed already today with the president of ASEAN, Dr. Ibrahim, and next year's president of ASEAN, the president of the Philippines, President Marcos, the intention to conclude the ASEAN-Canada Free Trade Agreement by next year. In addition, we announced that we will be initiating free trade talks with the Philippines with a similar deadline. So accelerated free trade talks with the Philippines, Canada and the Philippines. And of course, in recent weeks, we just concluded the free trade agreement between Canada and Indonesia. So building at home, diversifying our trade relationships abroad, and being ready to work with the United States government as and when the time comes.
Canada's just looking for leverage on America. That's really the plan. In fact, liberals are on the record, and so is the mainstream propaganda media stations are on the record saying that Canada doesn't currently have really any or enough leverage against the United States to be able to say, well, you know what, we're not going to do what you say because we have all these other deals with these other countries and you can go F yourself. So that's what Canada's currently looking for, is to advance free trade with other countries, get into other markets so that Canada can eventually have some form of leverage, which is something that I cold-heartedly disagree with. I don't think that we need leverage with America. I think that Canada should be working to have a better relationship with America, joint military bases, bring the American cell phone providers, home internet, television, more American services into Canada. You can even create jobs for Canadians with American companies, but none of this is going to happen if we're fighting with America, which seems to be Carney's motto. Again, that's my interpretation, and that's my opinion. I'd love to know yours.
Mr. President, it's an honor. We've met on the phone. We met briefly before that remarkable welcoming ceremony, and we were just talking about the legendary hospitality, energy, and values of the Philippines. Close friend of Canada, more than 1 million Filipinos and people of Filipino origin in our country, building our country strong, underscoring our values. We have much to discuss. We are close commercial partners that can only grow. We are defense partners, very important defense partners. That is growing, including with a visit to your country next week from our Minister of Defense, and that cooperation, which we discussed in the summer, has advanced, and many other areas in sustainable development for our countries and the world. Thank you. Very good. Handshake? Yep.
Oh, the handshake.
Yes, that makes it official.
Yes.
Now we've actually met.
All right, thank you.
Super weird, super weird. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these other countries are actually trying to increase their trade with Asia, and Canada is left with the measly scraps. Canada's not first pickings when it comes to international trade with other countries. America is. People want deals with America. And the only country that can't seem to actually get a deal with America, it's not China. It's not even Russia. It's not India. It's Canada. The country that has the biggest trade with the United States can't seem to find a deal with the United States. That is very, very bizarre and is very telling of what Canada's Liberal government is truly capable of, or I guess in this case, incapable of.
Of players in Asia right now. We've, of course, got Treasury Secretary for the Trump administration, Scott Bessent, whose clip you just heard from, referring to some of the moves made by Canadians as the moves of a hothead. We know that the president is there, and we know that our own prime minister is on this very important trip to Asia, seeking a new trade deal with Asian partners. Although this is day one of the ASEAN summit in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, the main thing that's been preoccupying the prime minister and that delegation is fixing the negotiations with the Washington delegation. How things are moving on that front remains quite unclear. CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian has more from Kuala Lumpur.
12 hours after U.S. President Donald Trump's social media post threatening an additional 10% in tariffs on Canadian goods, Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed the situation with journalists, though he took no questions and said little he had not before.
The government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations or discussions with our American counterparts. We have a consistent focus in those discussions on doing the best deal for Canadian workers and their families. It is the sole responsibility of the government of Canada to have those discussions.
There's no sense of when talks with Trump could resume, but Carney has been busy here, holding one-on-ones with the leaders of Vietnam, Laos, and the Philippines, with the goal of signing a free trade agreement with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations by the end of 2026, and doubling Canadian exports away from the U.S. over the course of the next decade. One business group, though, says it's key to restore talks with the Americans.
We've got to pull our own act together here if we're going to be able to have an opportunity to make progress. But I've said to the Prime Minister and the government very clearly, your first job is to stabilize the relationship with the United States of America.
With Carney's agenda on Monday largely taken up with meeting the Malaysian Prime Minister, speaking to Trump again may have to wait until both men are in South Korea later this week for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Kuala Lumpur.
Okay, let's dig deeper into this story with someone we often turn to for her expertise. We've got Veena Najibullah on the line. We turn to her for her expertise in foreign policy. Veena, good to see you. Thanks for making some time.
Thank you, Natasha.
Hey, Veena, how screwed is Canada on a scale of yes to no? The answer is simply yes. Canada is very much screwed. And even if we do pick up some scraps, which it does seem like we are, right? Like, all credit to Carney for, yes, he actually is seemingly getting something done. It's just not to the fullest potential. Canada could, if we were on better terms with America, we could actually be sitting next to President Trump when dealing with Asian markets and say, well, you know what? Why don't we work on a trilateral deal where you do deal with business, but also with Canada? It's great for the American and the Canadian economy. And that is something that is actually possible. It is. Just not with these liberals, apparently.
Veena, I do want to talk to you about the Prime Minister's trip to Asia and how important this trade negotiating process will be there. But I do want to ask you about the news of the day, which is essentially how poorly it seems things are going between Ottawa and Washington, and with our imports into the United States being hit with an additional 10% tariff. How are you interpreting these moves?
Of course, it's another downturn in discussions with the U.S., but it's the Prime Minister saying we have to be able to do multiple things at once. Stabilizing trade discussions with the U.S. is job number one, but equally important is to diversify our trading relationships, our partnerships, including in Asia, and the Prime Minister is in Asia right now. And then, of course, the final job is to strengthen our economy here at home, and that requires investments. Again, Asia becomes critical to that as well. So I think while what's happening happening with the U.S. matters. We should also pay attention to what's going on in Asia right now. The Prime Minister is there. It's his first trip. And just in one day, he is making some difference already.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so and you're so right, because part of my frustration with this is that this is a very significant trip. If the country and this particular government is focusing on diversifying trade and getting the infrastructure to make that happen, once again, we have to focus on what's happening with Trump. So let's you and I focus on what's going on in Kuala Lumpur. You said that the Prime Minister has already made some important steps today. Talk to us about that. What have you seen so far?
Absolutely. So you're right that for us to be able to double our non-U.S. trade, we need to focus on Asia. Prime Minister met today with the leader of Vietnam, which is our largest trading partner in the region and also a member of CPTPP. He also met with prime ministers of Malaysia as well as president of Philippines. And of course, that's critical because he's trying to finalize the Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement. So Malaysia is the chair now and Philippines will be the chair next year. And Prime Minister Carney essentially wants to see that deal finalized as early as possible next year with Philippines as the partner. They also importantly agreed to expedite Canada-Philippines free trade negotiations. So in other words, there was a rapid desire to see more opportunities for Canadians to be able to do business in the region. But I think what's equally important, Natasha, is that the Prime Minister was able to raise Canada's profile, to position Canada as a leader that's interested in continuing rules-based trade, in continuing economic integration at a time when the U.S. is pulling back, when China is also undermining rules-based trade. So smaller countries, Canada, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, all of these other non-U.S., non-China countries need to come together, and the Prime Minister is able to articulate what Canada brings to the table for those conversations. Canada was critical in shaping the world that no longer is, sort of the rules-based trading order that has been with us for the last 30 years. Now we need to be at the table and have discussions on what new multilateralism looks like and how Canada will be positioning itself, what Canada will be bringing to this new conversation.
That's so critical, Veena, because unfortunately, Canada is so much in the shadow of the United States. We don't think so because we're Canadians and we understand the distinction between the U.S. and Canada. But when you're right next to this superpower, the global superpower, we often get ignored by international trading partners, whether it's...
Yes, we do, and it'll continue to happen, but it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to try to be better than America. That's never going to happen. We can try to get a bigger slice of the pie that benefits our people. And if you put all ego aside, no ego, and you look at the facts, Canada can do a much better job when it is under better relations with America than when we're trying to fight America. It's just not going to work in Canada's best interest. Look at our auto sector. We had all these auto companies invest in Canadian jobs. It's Stellantis, which the government paid $15 billion to set up this massive building, set up the infrastructure for Stellantis. And Stellantis just said, yeah, we're gonna go to America. Bye-bye. Like, it's just that simple. So companies that are coming and investing in Canada, they're only doing it for a short amount of time because they eventually want to go to America. And they view Canada as the stepping stool to getting into America. That's just the unfortunate reality. It wouldn't have to be that way, though. It doesn't have to be that way. But our leadership is choosing for it to be that way. That's at least how I see it.
The ASEAN's or APEC, the 21 economy member group. So do you think that their perspective on us is shifting at all, or is it really still the United States that they are going to be preoccupied with?
I think you're absolutely right that oftentimes we get mistaken for the U.S. sort of as a smaller partner of the U.S. But the Prime Minister in his speeches, I mean, he's been there for one day and he's already given 2 speeches that have been shown both obviously around the world, but also to the audiences locally. He's positioned Canada as different from the U.S. Canada that still respects rules-based trade, that values inclusive and sustainable growth. Canada that's interested in expanding CPTPP, which is a rule rules-based trading bloc of Asian partners, but also connecting that kind of Asia grouping of free and rules-based trade with Europe and sort of positioning Canada as the bridge, which I think works really well given our geography and given the fact that we're both in a free trade agreement with Europe, but also members of CPTPP. He's also obviously talking about the strength of Canada, because at a time when all countries are trying to diversify, there's a lot of competition for the same resources, for attention of world leaders. So for the Prime Minister to be able to really calmly and confidently explain what Canada brings, that Canada is an energy superpower, that Canada is very good at mining, both in terms of investments, but also capabilities. So I think that's differentiating us at a time when we need to be much more visible and present on the global stage. But I think one final point, Natasha, is that this is also reminding Canadians that Asia matters. I think you're absolutely right that we're so focused on the US and to some degree also Europe. We just did a poll and 90% of Canadians say they don't know much about Malaysia or Singapore or Southeast Asia. So this trip is also putting the spotlight of how Asia is critical to Canada's economic prosperity.
Let me ask you about the fact that this is all so great in theory for the Canadian government, for the Canadian economy. Everyone's on board. Let's get these trade deals going. The infrastructure, Veena, I mean, are you following all of that? Do we have the infrastructure to make all of this happen, all these grand visions?
You're absolutely right. The short answer is no, not right now. For us to be able to get our energy products, our agri-food products to the global markets, to get them to Asia, we need a lot more infrastructure, more ports, railways, pipelines, all of that. And for that, we need investment.
Yeah, we need investment. We need a metric shit ton of money, which Canada is not prepared for, nor do we have the investment backing to actually be able to successfully pull this off. But you know what we could pull off? Proper trade with America, since we share a freaking land border with them.
And the Prime Minister actually put a target. He said he wants to get $500 billion of additional investment into Canada. Well, we need obviously Asia investors. We need Australia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, all of them to chip in for us to be able to meet that, because trade diversification only happens if we have the trade enabling infrastructure. So the objective of building a strong Canada and diversifying our partnerships work hand in hand, which is why it's so critical for the Prime Minister to not only focus on the US, although that's of course critical, but also find new partners and new relationships in Asia.
Veena, I'm being told we got to wrap it up. So let me just get this last one in quickly, if you don't mind, which is the issue of China. This is a huge economic superpower, one that we haven't had the best relations with in recent years. How does the Prime Minister manage that without compromising our principles and our national security?
Absolutely. A lot to watch on China, because Prime Minister Carney wants to meet with President Xi on the margins of APEC. So I hope we'll have another conversation about that, because that will be critical. But short answer is that we have to stabilize and improve our relationships with China. At the same time, we cannot become more strategically dependent on China. In other words, trade with Asia is more than just China, and trade with China has to be diversified. It can't just be in a couple of sectors. Our over-reliance on China for things like canola exports has to come to an end at the same time as we improve our relationship and have more dialogue. So yes, diversification and deepening of trade with Asia, but not necessarily further dependence on China.
That's exactly, even though they're saying they don't want further dependence on China, that's exactly what they are looking to do, because they want to get off of American dependence, and the dependence has to shift to somebody. Yes, it can be diversified into a evenly cut pie across other countries, but we know that Canada admires China's dictatorship. You may not. I certainly don't. But Justin Trudeau did, and that's the government that we still have. At least all of Justin Trudeau's minions are still at play. They're still Liberal MPs. And the only person I got replaced is the head figure, Mark Carney. And he's proving that he actually does admire China's dictatorship the same way, if not more, than what Justin Trudeau did. So we're gonna have to wait and see how this does play out. But again, it's not the way that I want Canada to function, and I don't have all of the answers. I only have my own opinion formulated by my own experiences, and I see that where we're going, shifting away from America and closer to Asia, is not the best and most prosperous thing for Canada. The fear that Canadians have is because of Trump, because the propaganda machine is so anti-Trump that now Canadians are starting to hate America because of Trump. And it's just bizarre. So I want to pass a question off to you. How do you feel about this? Do you think that Canada's doing the right move by moving more trade to Asia, which is going to cost us more money and probably produce less profits? Or do you think that we should side with America more? Looking forward to reading down in the comments what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy your day. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in another one. Bye for now.